The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Eli and Jonah felt the coarse rope tighten against their necks. The wooden gallows loomed over the dusty square, its shadow stretching long and heavy across the ground as if the earth itself mourned what was about to happen. The boys, no more than 20, faces pale and drawn, stood trembling, their boots barely brushing the platform. They were not killers, nor thieves, nor outlaws. They were guilty only of overhearing something they were never meant to know. 2 nights before, hidden behind the hayloft of an old barn, they had stumbled upon a meeting of powerful men, land barons plotting to seize the valley and drive out the families who had worked its soil for generations. They hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the secret had lodged itself inside them like a brand. And when whispers spread that the boys knew too much, the verdict was swift and merciless. Now the crowd gathered, restless with anger stirred by lies, their faces set hard, as though convinced that silencing 2 frightened drifters would somehow protect the order of things. Eli's hands clenched in fists behind his back, though his body shook with the fear of what was to come. Jonah, younger and less hardened, had tears pooling in his eyes, his lips moving silently as if in prayer. Around them, the air was thick with dust and judgment, and the creak of the rope above seemed to echo louder than any voice. In that moment, the world felt stripped of mercy. To die for a truth they never asked to carry, it seemed unbearably cruel. And yet, even as despair closed in, there was a flicker of something unspoken, a faint hope that maybe, just maybe, someone among the crowd might see them for what they truly were, not criminals, but boys trapped in a storm too big for them. In the restless hush of the crowd, one man stood apart, his weathered hat pulled low, his jaw tight with quiet fury. Rancher Cole Harding had come not to watch, but to bear witness. His hands, calloused from years of breaking horses and mending fences, gripped the rail in front of him as he fixed his gaze on the boys upon the scaffold. To everyone else they looked like guilty men, to Cole, they looked like sons. He remembered nights by his own hearth, long ago, when laughter filled his home before fever carried his children away. The pain of that loss still burned in him like a slow fire, and seeing Eli and Jonah, 2 lads shaking beneath a noose, stirred something deeper than outrage. It stirred memory, compassion, and the knowledge that no rope could strangle truth. Around him, voices rose in impatient growls, the townsfolk eager to see justice served, though justice had been twisted by fear and lies. Cole's eyes never left the boys. He saw Jonah glance skyward, lips trembling in silent plea, and Eli stiffen his shoulders as if trying to meet death with dignity. They were too young, too untested, to be swallowed by the cruelty of powerful men. Cole felt his breath tighten. He had lived his whole life by a code: work hard, speak plain, protect the weak, and now, as the hangman's hand rested on the lever, he knew silence would be a betrayal of everything he stood for. Inside him, a choice solidified like steel: either he would watch these boys vanish from the world as unjustly as his own children had, or he would find the courage to step forward and change the ending. The weight of it pressed against his chest, and still, his resolve grew stronger. The hangman's fingers curled around the lever, the crowd shifting forward like a wave about to break, when Cole Harding's boot struck the dirt with a force that silenced the square. His voice, deep and steady, cut through the restless noise like a rifle shot. "If you hang them," he thundered, pointing at the boys, "you'll hang the truth with them." The words froze the air. Murmurs rippled through the gathered townsfolk, heads turning, eyes narrowing, as suspicion replaced certainty. Cole climbed the steps of the scaffold, his frame straight as an oak despite the years on his back, and he stood between the boys and the crowd. "You've been lied to," he declared. "These lads aren't criminals, they're witnesses. They overheard a plot by the men who pretend to be your protectors. The barons who claim they fight for this valley are the very ones trying to steal it." His words landed heavy, stirring doubt in even the hardest faces. The land barons themselves shifted uneasily in the crowd, trying to mask their fury with scorn, but Cole pressed on, his voice cracking with the weight of conviction. "These boys could have run, could have stayed silent, but they didn't. They carry a burden none of you would want, and you mean to kill them for it?" No. Not today. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Eli and Jonah stared wide-eyed at the man who had placed himself between them and death, disbelief mixing with desperate hope. The crowd, once united in anger, now broke into restless whispers. Some muttered agreement, others cast suspicious glances at the land barons whose faces had turned ashen. The noose still hung loose above the boys, but for the first time since dawn, its grip no longer felt inevitable. A crack of light had pierced the darkness. The hangman's hand faltered, the crowd no longer roaring but murmuring like a river searching for its course. The tide had shifted. Men and women who had come thirsting for punishment now found themselves staring at the barons, suspicion gnawing at their certainty. One of the valley's elders stepped forward, his voice thin but resolute. "Is it true, then? That you would rob us of our land?" The barons sputtered, their polished words collapsing under the weight of Cole's truth. A spark caught in the crowd, anger, yes, but no longer at Eli and Jonah. The boys felt the ropes loosen as townsfolk moved to cut them free. Eli gasped as the coarse hemp slid from his neck, while Jonah collapsed, sobs tearing from his chest. For a moment they clung to each other, overwhelmed by the dizzying shock of being handed back their lives. Cole's hand found their shoulders, steady and strong, anchoring them. His voice dropped low, meant only for their ears. "You're free now, boys. Don't waste the gift." Eli, still shaking, met his eyes and saw no judgment there, only a fierce compassion that pierced deeper than the terror he'd known on the gallows. Jonah, wiping his face with trembling hands, whispered, "Why would you risk everything for us?" Cole's gaze lingered, heavy with unspoken grief, and he answered simply, "Because once, I wished someone had done the same for mine." The boys understood then, not fully, but enough, that their survival came tethered to a responsibility larger than themselves. As the barons were seized and the crowd surged with new purpose, Eli and Jonah stood at Cole's side, no longer just drifters awaiting their end, but young men with a chance to shape a different story. In that charged moment, fear gave way to something far greater, the first fragile taste of hope. In the days that followed, the valley felt different, as though the air itself had been washed clean. The land barons, once untouchable, had been stripped of their power, their schemes laid bare for all to see. Families who had lived under the shadow of fear now walked with straighter backs, their voices louder, their futures reclaimed. Amid it all, Eli and Jonah found themselves on the Harding ranch, hands blistered from work, muscles aching, but spirits steadier than they had ever known. They learned the rhythm of honest labor. Mending fences, herding cattle, tending soil, and in the quiet moments between chores, they learned something deeper from Cole. He never lectured, never boasted, instead, he taught by the way he carried himself, by the kindness in his gestures and the weight of his silence. Around the campfire at night, he spoke of integrity, of standing tall even when it cost you everything, and the boys listened with the reverence of those who had once stood on the edge of death. Slowly, the fear that had gripped their hearts was replaced by a resolve to live with the same courage that had saved them. Neighbors began to see them not as drifters or doomed boys, but as young men with purpose, willing to fight for the valley that had given them a second chance. And though Cole rarely spoke of the day at the gallows, his eyes softened whenever he looked at them, as if he could see the faint outlines of the sons he had lost. In that shared silence, Eli and Jonah found not just a savior, but a father of the heart. What began in fear and injustice ended in belonging and hope, a reminder that the greatest power in the West, or anywhere, was not the rope, the gun, or the land, but the choice to stand for one another.